the moral motto of positivism: live for others. In this episode of Philosophers Explained by me, Stephen Hicks, we turn to Auguste Comte's 1852 Catechism of Positive Religion, in which the coiner of the term sociology and the coiner of the term altruism explains what positivism means philosophically, morally, and politically. Let's go to the text. Comte's 1852 Catechism is meant to be a more popular follow-up work to systematically abstract treatises he had written a few years earlier. Comte is the founder of sociology, according to many textbooks and historians of the field. Indeed, he is the person who coined the term sociology, the idea that there is such a thing as a science or social science of society with regular laws that can be understood and used for explanatory and perhaps predictive purposes. He's also the coiner of the term altruism, breaking that down: alter, the other, and ism, a principled focus on the other as a moral theory. And indeed, Comte wants to argue that positivism is primarily a philosophical doctrine, but as a foundational part of that, there is a morally altruistic, live for others ethos built into it that is then going to be applied to the science of society. And then, as we will see, the science of society, if it consistently applies that moral philosophy, will come out in the form of some sort of authoritarian regime, what he calls a sociocracy. So here, hearkening back to Plato, the idea that instead of having perhaps philosopher kings, wise philosophers who are running all of society, in Comte's case, it's going to be the wise sociologists who have the power and are running all of the things, hence sociocracy. So let's plunge, though, into the text. Now, the way Comte wants to make this a more popular and accessible work is by casting it in a dialogue form. And so what he does is choose a male figure whom he calls a priest of humanity, and a woman who is not named but is to represent womankind. And so they engage in a dialogue with the priest explaining the core doctrines to an intelligent, alert, and questioning woman. So let's plunge in. In the preface, though, Comte sets the stage by hearkening back to some earlier talks that he had given. Quote, "In the name of the past and of the future, the servants of humanity, theoreticians and practicians, come forward to claim as their due the general direction of this world, in order to construct at length the true providence, moral, intellectual, and material, excluding once for all from political supremacy all the different servants of God, Catholic, Protestant, or deist, as at once belated and a source of trouble." Ending that quote, a self-quote from Comte there, from a talk he had given the year earlier. So what we are then going to do is cast ourselves as servants of humanity, but we also are claiming that it is our role to direct the world. And this new religion, we are using this catechism language in the title, which comes out of religious rhetoric, religious doctrines, manuals for the guidance of individuals and groups of individuals as well. But it's going to be a new catechism of the positivists here. And he states quite forthrightly that this is not going to be a traditional religion. So that is to say, the religions that have been dominating in the West, and he gives three of them: the Catholic form of Christianity, the Protestant form, and then the slightly more naturalistic and or perhaps science-friendly deistic understandings of religion. All of those are to be rejected in favor of the new form of science applied. Now, this science applied, carrying on the quote here, he introduces the new term, sociocracy. And a cracy or a krakos, going back to the original work, is a question about power. Who has the power? Is it an aristocracy? That is to say, the best people have the power. It is a democracy in which the people have the power. And here it's going to be the sociologists. That term, I believe Comte coined that term around 1838 or so. So he had several years to introduce this into general purpose. So we're trying to institute now a true sociocracy. In fact, we sociocrats are no more democrats than aristocrats. So it's neither old-fashioned aristocracy, and by this rather, I think he means any sort of hereditary aristocracy or anything rooted in feudalism as an actual historic set of institutions coming down through the ages into contemporary Europe. So it's not going to be aristocracy, but it's also not going to be democracy. It's going to be sociocracy. Now, again, coming back to the theme of traditional religion and its theocratic doctrines, the West can no longer submit its reason to the guidance of opinions which evidently admit of no demonstration, which are radically chimerical, as are all opinions derived from theology, even if reduced to its fundamental dogma. So whatever religion has been, whatever its theological doctrines have been, all of that is for naught. Intellectually, it is to be set aside. We're not doing metaphysical supernaturalism. And while we are going to say there is nonetheless something correct in religion as it has come down from it, must be stripped of all of this metaphysical speculation. And that's the import of the positivistic idea, that we are focused on this world. We have a new understanding of science, and that is going to be our true basis. Now, that then is to say, there of course have been other philosophers. Comte is a Frenchman, so even if we look at the big names in French philosophy, he has mostly disdain for them. He mentions in this next section here both Voltaire and Rousseau, both of whom were enemies of each other intellectually and did not like each other in terms of their personality nor in terms of much of their politics. Nonetheless, Comte is also saying we are not in any respect Voltairean, nor are we Rousseauian. And so from the followers of those schools, I never expected anything but hindrances, intentional or not, from the belated relic of the superficial and immoral sects sprung from Voltaire and Rousseau. So Voltaire out, Rousseau out, all of traditional theology out. Now, on the positive side, though, he does name two more recent philosophers, both philosophers of the 1700s, as more on the right track. Next section here. Whilst Hume is my principal precursor in philosophy, Kant comes in as an accessory. So both Hume, the Scot, and Kant, the Prussian, are more fundamental guides to positivism philosophically. We do have episodes on David Hume and on Immanuel Kant in our Philosophers Explained series, so those would be useful backgrounders, both for their critiques of philosophy up until their generations and their ideas of what should be substituted in its fame. So, nonetheless, a big part of this, and this is something that is common both to Hume and Kant. Hume argues that we cannot prove the existence of a God. Kant agrees we cannot prove the existence of a God. Hume, though, wants to set aside all of religion and metaphysical beliefs in the existence of God and substitute something more sentiment or feeling-based for his epistemology. Kant argues for setting aside the idea that we can never come to really know God, but nonetheless wants to think there is some room for a kind of faith and also for a legacy from religion, that there are these supernaturally based principles, even though we can't discern that supernaturally basis. And nonetheless, there are these principles that come to us as commands, and that we should be regulating our thinking and our behavior in terms of those regulative principles. But go back to Hume and Kant for some of that as background. What does Comte nonetheless make of this? Experience has made it quite clear that no supernatural belief can satisfy this ultimate longing. It's going to be experience, not supernatural quests or seeking mystical insights of any sort. This long-expected fusion, which must afterwards gradually embrace the whole of mankind, can evidently only come from positivism. So he has articulated systematically the doctrines of positivism, its metaphysics, its largely suspicion of metaphysics, but nonetheless its more naturalistic, empirically based philosophy. And on the basis of that, now we're going to turn to a dialogue form to explicate the kinds of questions that a thoughtful but not yet educated person would ask about the doctrines of positivism, what its altruism involves, what its sociocracy involves, and so on. So the way he puts it here is, I have chosen an angelic interlocutress rather. And then on the other side, he's going to have a priest of humanity, and this man and this woman will engage in the discussion. But really, the priest of humanity is a stand-in for Comte himself, who, as he puts it here, says he is a kind of spokesman now for humanity as a whole, being the first positivist, the first sociocrat, so to speak. I have at length become for humanity an organ in the strictest sense, by founding the universal religion on true philosophy, that is to say, Humean and Kantian foundations, after I had extracted the latter from real science. And he then wants to say, well, I'm using all of this science language, I'm disparaging traditional religion, I'm saying theology and supernaturalism are false paths to go down. Why am I still then nonetheless using the rhetoric of religion? I'm going to be talking about priests of humanity and catechism and so forth. Well, here's his explanation for that. It is then without effort that I proceed to use in this catechism the personal designations habitually used in religious instruction. It will be a priest of humanity. And I'm going to do some of this standard taking over of the sacraments that have been part and parcel of the practice and incorporate those into this new positivistic religion of humanity. So, for example, one of the strictures is you cannot become a priest of humanity unless A, you are a male, and B, unless you reach age 42 years. This is why I have fixed the ordination of the priests of humanity at 42. So it takes a great deal of instruction, a great deal of learning how to become a positivistic scientist and then a worthy candidate for the sociocracy. It's not something that young people can wrap their minds around. There's a lot of effort behind. But there's going to be then these two representative individuals. And in fact, they are representative of the two key functions to be formed also in the proper society. The woman and the priest are, in fact, the two indispensable elements of the true moderating power, which is at once domestic and civic. So women will have as their sphere primarily the domestic sphere, and men will have as their sphere primarily the civic sphere, because there are differences between men and women that make them more suited for each of them. But this is in no way from Comte's perspective to disparage either of these. The heart states the questions, that's the more feminine side. The intellect answers them, that's the more masculine side. Thus, the very form of this catechism points at once to the great central idea of positivism: man thinking under the inspiration of woman. Woman is the inspirational source. Man then takes that inspiration and does the thinking on behalf of society as a whole. The adoption of this method, carrying on in the next paragraph, for the new religious instruction. So it is a catechism form. Now, who are the people for whom this catechism is directed? Comte thinks that most people have been corrupted, particularly the intellectuals, but also the vast majority of people in this new democratic and republican era who think that they should be free, self-governing, able to participate in the political process. Comte also thinks that is a form of corruption as well. We are not democratic, we are not republican, we are sociocrats. It's the sociologists who should be rulers. Nonetheless, there are among the workers, among the proletariat, some of them for whom this is the message, and also certain women, particularly women who have not yet been captured by the early feminists and also smitten with the idea that they should have equal liberty rights and equal political rights as well. So here's Comte saying, the better proletariats, that is to say the proletariat, the workers, are likely, it seems to me, ere long to welcome heartily this short but decisive work. So I'm writing for the better proletaries. Yet it is more suited to women, especially to women without instruction, to uneducated women. Most women who have been educated have already been corrupted by the wrong ideas, the wrong philosophers. We can find the noble submissiveness of spirit required. It's in the better proletarians and yet in uneducated women, the potential for the kind of submissiveness, but it's going to be a submissiveness of spirit that, of course, Comte is going to say it's noble. This is your calling. And if we can tap into that, that is what's going to enable what he calls here a systematic regeneration, right, of society. 1848 was a year of much unrest and revolt and revolution in many capitals in Europe and places influenced by Europe, and Comte sees that as a terrible stain on the middle part of the century. During the last 4 years, the reason of the people has suffered profoundly from the unfortunate exercise of universal suffrage. So mass participation in the political process, including voting, that has just been a disaster. There won't be any of that in the sociocracy. So an element of this submissiveness of spirit to the servants of humanity for humanity as a whole. Here Comte then introduces the moral philosophy that positivism is going to be based upon. The moral motto of positivism: live for others. So clearly on the great political divide in the modern world between liberals who had been arguing that human beings as individuals should fundamentally be free, that they have a right to their own life, their own liberty, their own property, the pursuit of happiness and so forth, that living for myself freely by my own lights as a self-responsible citizen and participating fully in the political process, that model Comte is entirely rejecting on moral grounds. That is self-centered, that is egoistic, that is individualistic. Instead, the coining of the term altruism is meant fundamentally here. It is others, particularly others as humanity for whom one should be living, not for oneself. Live for others. And positivism politically is going to be working out what that consistent and principled living for others is and should mean. Now, after that preface, we plunge into the first of the conversations. What is this general theory of religion, and how should we understand, so to speak, positivism as either a replacement for traditional religion or a modernized religion or a rejection of religion? So the woman asks the question: I ask you to begin your exposition by explaining in direct and precise language the radical sense of the word religion. Okay, and so the priest answers: it expresses the state of perfect unity, which is distinctive of our existence, both individual and social, when all the parts, moral as well as physical, habitually converge towards a common purpose. So notice what we have here is that religion is not defined in terms of a metaphysical belief in a supernatural being or gods or goddesses or anything supernatural. It is not defined in terms of any epistemological criteria, how one comes to know through mystical experiences or revelation or faith or appealing to tradition. Instead, this is a secular social understanding of what religion it is. Religion means people coming together in one and as one, where everything we do as individuals is part of the social unit for a common purpose. So it's not a society of individuals with their own purposes. There is one set of social purposes and everything is unified toward that common purpose. That is what Comte means by religion. Now this then means rules and regulation. Religion then consists in regulating each individual nature and in rallying all the separate individuals. So we need to regulate individuals and then rally them, gather them together. Now, there is also only one true religion, and it will be applied universally. None of this idea that religion is a matter of one's own individual conscience or individual beliefs or individual practices. And perhaps we will find some overlap and come together for religious purposes, but that primarily it is an individual thing. No, for Comte, it is a there's one religion and everyone should participate in that one religion. Quote, "There is at bottom but one religion, at once universal," that is to say, applies to everyone, "and final. Once it's worked out, there are no changes, to which all the partial and provisional syntheses more and more pointed, so far as their respective conditions allow." So there have been historically lots and lots of workings out of religion, but as religion has worked it out, there has been a synthesis toward one true final religion, and it is Comte in his generation who's put together the synthesis. This is not now merely a psychological or a mental or a spiritual doctrine. The universality and the regulation applies also to human beings as physical beings. Hence, under positivism, Comte says here, a wise reincorporation of medicine into the domain of the priesthood. When the positive clergy shall have adequately fulfilled its encyclopedic conditions, in fact, the moral point of view is alone able to secure active obedience for hygienic injunctions, alike whether they concern the individual or society. So we don't leave it up to individuals to regulate their own health, their own fitness, to seek their own medicine, and so forth. There will be a universal medicine that is part of this universal doctrine of positivism that has been worked out. It will be applied. Individuals be regulated according to it. Well, why? Why do we need to have this more authoritarian medicine? Well, as Comte forthrightly puts it here, most people will not do it properly. Men will not generally submit to any practical inconvenience solely on the ground of their personal health, where each is left to judge for himself. They will eat the wrong things, they won't go to the physician, they won't listen to the physician, they won't exercise, they won't do whatever it is. People are not competent, not to be trusted on these matters, so this state, the sociocracy with the power, will regulate their medical lives. Carrying on, we must appeal to an authority higher than any individual to establish, even on the most unimportant matters, rules of real efficacy, resting then on a social judgment which never admits uncertainty. So it's not even on these major things, it's even on the unimportant. Everything must be regulated by the higher authority, the priesthood in the sociocracy, and it never says it is uncertain. It claims certainty, and it will be followed in all areas. Now, the woman is getting a little bit worried here. This sounds pretty strong. In this abstract theory of our unity, I find, my father, a radical difficulty. And this is the difficulty. Our personal instincts have unfortunately greater energy than our sympathetic tendencies. So maybe it sounds nice that we should all be striving for unity and common purpose and willing to submit to the regulations from higher authority, but people are self-interested, they are egoistic, they are selfish, and it seems like those aspects of human nature are a lot stronger than our social willingness to submit or social caring for other people and so forth. So what are we going to do about this problem? Priest. Herein you have, my daughter, directly raised the grand problem of man's existence, which is in fact to secure the gradual predominance of sociability over personality, whereas personality is naturally predominant. So you're right, we are naturally more self-centered, and so the big project is how can we overcome that and gradually achieve the true altruism that Comte is arising for. So this is going to be gradual. It's not going to be an all or one thing. But moral unity then is impossible, even in a solitary existence, for every being under the exclusive dominion of personal affections, which prevent his living for others. So the big problem here is that I've got my personal affections. I have my dreams, I have my goals, I have my friends, I have my families, I have my particular things that I am affected by and feel affection for. That's the big problem. And so what we need to do is find a way to overcome that. Personal affections, personal inclinations, egoism is the big bad boy from this perspective. So what we need to do is find a way to help human beings find their true humanity. What's stopping them from, as he puts it here, from their not finding outside of themselves the chief motors of their conduct. Altruistic unity does not, as egoistic unity, require the entire sacrifice of the inclinations which are contrary to it in principle, but merely their wise subordination to the predominant affection, when it condenses all sound morality in the law of live for others. Positivism allows and so forth. So there's going to be a certain amount of moral teaching from the get-go. And then, of course, that will be reinforced by the political powers, the actual regulations of the sociocracy. But gradually, we will get people to subordinate their personal inclinations over time for the other. Well, the woman is not yet convinced, but my father, this very sanction of the egoistic inclinations, constantly stimulated as they moreover are by our bodily wants, seems to me still incompatible with a habitual supremacy of our weak sympathetic feelings. So maybe you're leaving the door open for some egoism, and that's just going to take over. That's a big problem. And Comte wants to say, well, this is in effect a work in progress. Science is progressing, and as we work out the science, we will figure out more and more how to do so. So here's the statement of intent. The positive faith sets forth directly the real laws of the different phenomena observable, whether internal or external. That is, their unvarying relations of succession and resemblance, which enable us to foresee some as a consequence of other. It puts aside as absolutely beyond our reach and essentially idle all inquiry into causes properly so called, first or final, of any events whatsoever. That is to say, we're not going to do metaphysics. We're not even going to be trying to figure out the ultimate naturalistic causes of the world. Instead, we're just going to figure out what are the rules, what's the cause and effect of the behavior. That if there are these circumstances, then we get these effects, and then find a way to apply those socially. We don't need to get into ultimate essences or deep underlying causes. Positivism, carrying on the quote, was the direct result of this final discovery, the completion of our long initiation, and as such necessarily closing the preliminary of human reason. So part of the problem is that in early stages of science, we're still looking for ultimate natural essences or ultimate natural causes. Or in more traditional religious forms, we're trying to leave the natural world to find these ultimate causes and ultimate essences. Positivism is dispensing with both of those, and that is what is putting it on the path of true science. But even while religion traditionally has had a strongly altruistic, it wasn't necessarily called altruism, but the idea that you should be selfless and a servant of other people and being willing to sacrifice yourself for other people and so forth. So it had a strong altruistic ethic by another name, and it had this metaphysical story about the gods watching you and going to punish you if you don't. So it had sanctions and enforcement methods, and in many cases it was politicized in various forms of theocracy. Nonetheless, it was not able to do so because it wasn't scientific in the positivistic sense. The imaginary beings whom religion provisionally made use of inspired lively affections in man, affections which were even more powerful under the least elaborate fictions. This valuable aptitude could not but seem for a long period of time alien to positivism from the immense scientific introduction it required. So we have to get rid of the imaginary beings and do this altruism and sociology on a strictly scientific basis. Now, we have said live for others, but how should we think about those others, and how should I think of myself as a being who is living for others? Here Comte introduces a more organic, more collectivized understanding of the other to which one is subordinating, submissively acting with respect toward. Here, this last step condenses the whole positive conceptions in one single idea of an immense and eternal being, humanity, whose sociological destinies are in constant development under the necessary preponderance of biological and cosmological fatalities. Around this real great being, the prime mover of each individual or collective existence, our affections center. So we should understand humanity not as a collection of beings, and in particular not as a collection of beings, each of whom have their own affections and their own destinies and their own goals, but rather humanity itself is the being. It's humanity with a capital H. It is an immense and eternal being with a capital B. It's the real great being. And so to some extent, individuals as individuals are lesser. They're not fully real as individuals. So if we can have this realization, and we have the science with the proper understanding, and we have the sociocracy with the power, then we will be able to take on that egoism and defeat it. So, carrying on. I hope, my daughter, soon to make you see that it is possible to radically transform this egoism originally attaching to human labor. So it may then be that we are transforming human nature, or it may simply be that we are transforming human beings' current understanding of their human nature because of their current inappropriate social circumstances. But in proportion as man's industrial action becomes more and more collective after the Industrial Revolution, after the great revolutions of early capitalism, we are becoming more urban, we are working more in factories, and so people are coming together more and more. That's their industrial action, and on Comte's account, we are becoming therefore more collective. It tends more and more to the altruistic character, though the impulse of egoism must ever remain indispensable to its first beginning. For each habitually laboring for others, this existence develops of necessity the sympathetic affections when it is rightly appreciated. So the direction that we are going is more industrial, more organized, more regimented. And Comte goes on to give an example of the right kind of attitude and a current social institution that embodies many of it, and that is the military, with its military regime ordering from above and a spirit rather of submission to the order. You would, carrying on the quotation now, you would even now be able to trace this tendency if pacific activities still subject to no systematic discipline were as regulated as the soldier's life, the only life hitherto organized. So what we need to do is, so to speak, turn all of society into a giant army, a giant military with the same sense of discipline, obedience, hierarchical structure, and so forth. So what we are then facing up to is, in fact, that this is a great moral battle. The habitual predominance of altruism over egoism, in which lies the great problem for man. And then he goes on to say that's why we're having so much problems in contemporary society. Everybody has been taught life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, to be egoistic, that they're supposed to be free. And that's just leading to, as he puts it, our modern anarchy. You're never going to have a well-organized society or even a moral society under that ideology, and particularly its egoistic ethic. So another problem, though, is not merely the morality of individualism, egoism, self-interest, and so forth. It has been an epistemological or a cognitive change in the modern world that has led to that anarchy, and that is the idea that people should think for themselves or be able to form their own opinions and judgments of themselves. And the way Comte puts that here is, but this service becomes at the present day of capital importance as the means of finally terminating the anarchy of the West, the prominent characteristic rather of which is the revolt of the intellect. So back in the old days, there was an idea of a kind of priesthood, right? People who were specially trained in theology and the church and religiously associated institutions, right, were organized hierarchically, and the proper interpretations were formed at the top and things flowed down. But part of the revolt of the intellect was the idea of democratizing all of that. And individuals should think of religious matters for themselves, take charge of their own souls, and make their own judgments about what true religion is and what proper life practice should be. But that intellectual revolution has spawned anarchy, and so we have to reject all of that as well. Again, it's going to be an intellectual hierarchy as well as a moral hierarchy. Carrying on, could this catechism but convince women and proletaries that their would-be spiritual guides are radically incompetent to deal with the high questions of which the solution is in blind confidence left them? So the problem is we've let people think for themselves and they've just gone off and done their own thing, but they're not scientists, they're not positivists, they're not properly educated, or they've become enthralled. They follow John Locke, they follow Rousseau, they follow Voltaire, all of these false prophets, so to speak. And so that is what we need to overcome philosophically. Now the woman then says, okay, well, I already understand your conception of the true great being, and then she goes on to ask him to elaborate a little more. Do we mean just all of the people who are currently existing? And the priest goes on to say, no, it's not even just the current people existing. You must first, my daughter, define humanity as the whole of human beings, past, present, and future. So it's an organism or a great being, not only spread out in space, so to speak, to encompass all of us who are currently living. It is also spread out in time. It encompasses all human beings who ever have lived and all human beings who will live. Those are the ones to whom I should be serving, as seeing myself as an element of. Though all are necessarily born children of humanity, all do not become her servants, and many remain in the parasitic state, which is only excusable during their education. Now the woman is getting worried and expresses some even fright at this point here, because she thinks of herself as perhaps open to the idea of being part of humanity, wanting what's best for humanity, wanting to serve humanity and so forth. But she's still an individual. What about me? What about my life? What about my goals and my dreams? And the way she puts it here is this: but I am frightened at my own insignificance in the presence of such an existence, the immensity of which reduces me to nothing more completely than did of old the majesty of a God with whom, though feeble, I felt myself in some definite and direct relation. So here she wants to say, if we think about the traditional religions in their strong form, where we say, so to speak, I am nothing without God, or I am totally to become an empty vessel or an empty vehicle through which God will operate. I am only a servant of God. In God's presence, I feel myself to be insignificant. I lower my face, perhaps I fall to the ground and press my face into the dirt. That's how insignificant I am. And your doctrine, Comte, seems like it's making me even less significant than that, or more insignificant. So what is the priest's response to this? Well, it is, or it should be, right, sufficient if we see that whilst humanity as a whole always constitutes the principal motor of our operations, physical, intellectual, or moral, the great being can never act except through individual instruments. So pausing here, what he is saying is, don't forget that you are still part of this great being, and it's not that the great being acts entirely separately from you. Instead, the great being is going to be acting through you. So you are participating in, you are a part of it, and your significance then is being that instrument of the great being. So you still have some worth. Herein we have what should raise each worthy individuality in the presence of the new supreme being more than could be in the case of respect to the old. In fact, this latter had no real need of any of our services except to give him vain praises. So the idea here is that instead of just worshiping God and saying how wonderful God is, as in the old religions, at least here, the new supreme being, humanity, is going to have some work for us. So we're going to be doing something more than just saying how great and wonderful it is. All right, moving on to the third of the conversations. How are we going to do this? It seems like we have our work cut out for us. The woman. I hardly see how it will be possible to institute, still more to secure unanimous assent to, the daily realization in private or in public the subjective life, and yet its universal practice becomes indispensable for our religion. No doubt the entire regeneration of education will procure us on this point immense resources, which it is difficult to estimate at the present time. Nevertheless, I fear that these resources will always be too weak to overcome the difficulty. So clearly what the woman suggests is what we need to do is we need to take over the education system and use its vast resources toward re-educating people in the proper direction and getting rid of all of the false doctrines that have held human beings back from the new sociocracy. But even if we do take over the entire education system, I'm not sure that that's going to be enough. Priest. On the contrary, my daughter, I hope soon to dispel your uneasiness. The uneasiness will go away once we realize we have true religion with true science and not these false, old-fashioned religions. The emancipated now know that during this immense probation, the brains of all were habitually under the sway of beings purely imaginary, though believed to have a real and distinct existence. So we just had imaginary doctrines. So of course, even though they tried very hard with education, they weren't going to be able to succeed. Right? But once we have the right science, when the higher laws shall be sufficiently known, the positive priesthood will draw from them results more precious and susceptible of greater regularity than those of the most perfect astronomy. So once we've got the science all worked out, and just as we'll be able to understand and predict the movement of the heavens, we will be able to understand and predict the movements of all human beings. So the providence of man carrying on can and ought to aspire to give more regularity to the order which is most amenable to its action and can prevail with regard to the majority of events in the order which obeys only a blind fatality. All right, so we're going to then, once we have the true science with the true regulative principles understood, applied with to the education system, raise a new generation of human beings in a new sociocracy where the rules will be worked out scientifically such that we will be able to predict everything. All of society then will be under our control and directed toward its true common purpose. And this will include all of the normal sacraments of life. And we're just going to carry over those sacraments of life's stages from much of traditional religion. So here, hence our 9 social sacraments. Presentation, we're at the moment of birth, the new baby, the new infant is presented to the world. Initiation, admission, destination, marriage, maturity, retirement, transformation, and lastly, incorporation. So these 9 stages will all be worked out. There will be 9 stages of life, and what happens at each one will all be regulated, and human beings will be guided through life through all of those stages. Now, I want to draw to a close here just a couple of points about drawing on earlier religions. He had mentioned Protestantism and Catholicism and kind of deism as well. But he also makes an interesting reference to Islam as a religion from which the sociocracy of positivism can learn as well. As then is going to say, we're going to be regulating all of the aspects of life, and that is going to involve, education, schools, home life, various sorts of civic institutions, including churches and temples and so forth. And I'll just read this passage and then we'll unpack it a little bit. In all parts of the earth, then, the temples of humanity must turn towards the great metropolis, which for a long time, as a result of the whole past, must be Paris. So right now, Paris is the center of the world. The first temples of the sociocracy, the religion of humanity, will be in Paris. This is where all of the institutions, of course, there will then, as we spread out, be other temples built, but they will be orienting themselves toward Paris. Thus, Comte writes, positivism turns to account the happy, if rudimentary, conception of Islam in respect of a valuable institution, wherein the common attitude of all true believers brings out more fully the touching solidarity of their free homage. So the idea here is that Mecca is the center of religion, where it all began. The first temples or mosques were founded, and as it spread, nonetheless, there are, during all of the religious rituals, the fact that all of the practitioners during their daily rituals orient themselves toward Mecca, and the whole community is praying toward its center. That will be now, to draw the analogy back, Paris, Comte in this generation as the head, the entire world orienting itself toward that. Thus, then we go right inside the centers, though, the temples of humanity. Of course, the women will be in their homes by and large, but there will also be some women who are part of the proceedings of the temple as it goes about its business, as it engages in its rituals. The males will be the head priests as well, but nonetheless, in the temples there will be a mixture of men and women in this form. That is all I have to tell you as to our sacred buildings. As for the arrangements of the interior, All we need to observe at present is the need of reserving the chief sanctuary for women duly chosen, so that the priests of humanity may always find themselves in the midst of her best representatives. All right, that is positivism as a philosophical doctrine, made explicit that part of it is altruism in strong form as its moral doctrine, and then a kind of sociocracy as its political doctrine. Auguste Comte and the Religion of Humanity.